The night air clawed at my skin as I stood before the towering gates of Black Hollow Asylum, its iron bars rusted, bent and slick with the damp breath of decades left to rot, and yet it still loomed as though daring me to enter, as though mocking me with the same silence that had haunted my dreams for 20 years. My sister vanished here, swallowed whole by the walls that had once promised healing but delivered only shadows, and tonight I was not just returning to seek answers, I was returning to break the silence that had wrapped itself around my family like a shroud. The forest around the asylum was skeletal, blackened trees stripped of warmth, their branches twisted like skeletal fingers trying to reclaim the land, and as I pushed open the gates, the sound screeched across the night like a scream that had been waiting too long to be heard. Each step I took up the cracked path was measured, deliberate and heavy, my boots crunching over shards of stone, weeds and shattered glass that had spilled from broken windows, as if the asylum itself had begun to bleed pieces of itself into the earth, unwilling to hold its secrets any longer. The main doors were taller than I remembered from photographs, carved oak reinforced with tarnished brass hinges, their weight pressing against me the moment I pushed them, as though reluctant to let me inside. When they finally creaked open, the smell of damp wood, mildew, and something faintly metallic spilled out, striking my senses and pulling me into a place that felt both cavernous and suffocating at once. My lantern's glow barely cut the darkness, a trembling circle of pale light that quivered against endless corridors lined with peeling wallpaper, exposed pipes, and old patient notices curling on the walls like the skin of something long dead. My sister's face lingered in my mind, a frozen photograph I had stared at countless nights, her smile warm, her eyes alive with the kind of fire that refused to be extinguished. Yet here, that same fire had been stolen, extinguished by silence, and the question that had devoured me for years pressed harder against my chest: what happened to her in these halls? The asylum was not empty, not truly, because silence itself was alive here, wrapping itself around me, dragging at my thoughts, amplifying the sound of my breath until it felt like I was intruding on something that did not want me here. The first ward I entered still bore its name in flaking paint: Ward A, Rehabilitation. The door groaned, the sound echoing down the hall with such intensity that I froze, waiting, listening, expecting footsteps to answer, but none came, only the faint creak of pipes cooling somewhere above. Inside, the air was colder, and my lantern illuminated a room of overturned chairs, iron bed frames, and restraints scattered like the remnants of a storm. Patient files littered the ground, their ink blurred with time, but I could still make out words that sent a chill through me: memory regression, behavioral fracture, isolation therapy. The names scratched into the margins were familiar in ways they should not have been. As though the patients and I were bound by more than this place, as though I had stepped into something written long before I arrived. On the wall, scrawled in uneven letters, was a phrase painted in something that had long dried to brown: the walls remember what we cannot. My pulse raced as I traced the letters with my eyes, and the lantern flickered as though agreeing, as though the very walls of the asylum were leaning closer to watch me. That was when I heard it, a whisper, faint, drifting like smoke along the edges of my hearing. My sister's name. I spun, the lantern trembling in my hand, light spilling across shadows that shifted too quickly, retreating into corners like living things. My rational mind told me it was the wind, the echo of my own obsession, but the way it carried her name, the way it curled through the air with intent, was too sharp, too deliberate. Clara. I whispered back, my voice cracking as it left my throat, sounding foreign in the stillness. No answer came, but the whisper had carved itself into the air, lingering long after silence reclaimed the space. I pressed deeper into the asylum, corridor after corridor stretching like arteries, each turn feeding me further into a body that was still alive, its heartbeat hidden behind walls, its breath disguised as drafts of air. My lantern dimmed for a moment, and the corridor swallowed the light greedily, pulling me into the kind of darkness that suffocates rather than conceals. For a heartbeat I considered leaving, but the thought of my sister, alone, afraid, silenced within these walls, chained me in place. Then I found the first file room. Metal cabinets lined the walls, drawers half open, their contents spilling like guts across the floor. I knelt, brushing dust from one folder, and froze when I saw my sister's name typed neatly across the tab: Lila Mercer, patient 1473. My breath caught, and for a moment I could not force my hands to move, afraid that the truth inside would shatter me. When I finally pried the folder open, the pages were stiff, but the words cut through me with surgical precision: subject shows high resistance to regression therapy. Episodes of violent outburst when exposed to memory triggers strong willpower suggests unique psychological resilience. Recommended for advanced testing. My vision blurred with rage, my knuckles whitening against the pages as I imagined her strapped to a chair, her fire reduced to something they called an outburst, her strength exploited as a tool for experimentation. My stomach churned, and I slammed the folder shut, the sound booming through the room like thunder, stirring the shadows that clustered in the corners. I could almost feel the walls listening, savoring the return of a Mercer to its halls. I whispered again, softer this time, more to myself than anyone, "Clara, I will find you." The lantern hissed, a faint sputter of flame, and I swore I saw movement beyond the doorway, a flicker of a figure darting past, too quick, too silent, but undeniably there. My heart pounded, the instinct to chase colliding with the dread of being lured, but something deeper pushed me forward, something that told me this was no accident, this was a path laid for me to follow. The corridors led me to the surgical wing, and the moment I stepped through the threshold, the air shifted, thicker, heavier, tinged with the metallic tang of old blood that no time could erase. Rusted tables, broken restraints, shattered glass jars filled with cloudy fluid stood as relics of cruelty. A single surgical light dangled above, swaying gently though no wind touched it, its bulb flickering in a rhythm that seemed almost deliberate, like a signal. My chest tightened as I scanned the room, and then I saw it, on the far wall, written in chalk so fresh it crumbled as I touched it, was my name. Lila Mercer. My breath froze, my mind racing, because no one should know I was here, no one should know my name, and yet the asylum had written it as if it had been waiting. The chalk trailed into a message beneath, one that sent icy fingers crawling up my spine, "We never let them leave." I stumbled back, nearly dropping the lantern, my body colliding with the edge of a table, the metal clattering loud enough to send echoes chasing themselves down the corridor outside. The asylum did not feel abandoned anymore, it felt awake, alert, watching me, shaping itself around me. Every sound became a signal, every shadow a threat, and still I pushed deeper, because retreat was no longer an option. Clara's truth was here, chained to this place, and if I turned away now, I would never forgive myself. The sound of the table settling back into silence did not calm me, because the echoes carried further than they should have, as if the asylum itself wanted to spread my intrusion through its veins, announcing to every corner that I had arrived, that the last Mercer had returned to reclaim what had been stolen. My lantern trembled in my hand, light darting across walls that seemed to bend, stretch, and lean closer as though they were listening, breathing, waiting for me to stumble deeper. For one moment I swore the corridor ahead pulsed faintly, the wallpaper swelling and sinking like lungs, inhaling and exhaling, and I had to force myself not to turn and run, not to abandon everything to the shadows that hungered behind me. I pressed forward into the surgical wing's adjoining hallway, the floorboards beneath me groaning like a warning. And each step carried the weight of inevitability, a march into the jaws of something ancient and patient. The first door on the right hung open, hinges rusted but somehow shifting gently back and forth though no air stirred, and when I stepped inside, the lantern revealed rows of empty cribs, each one lined against the wall with peeling paint above them spelling out words that I wished I could unread. Born in silence, kept in silence, ended in silence. My throat tightened, bile rising as I imagined infants trapped here, their first cries smothered by the asylum's hunger. One of the cribs still had a tattered cloth folded within, and as I reached to touch it, the cloth shifted as though someone invisible had brushed past. My hand recoiled, heart hammering, but the cloth stilled, silent once again, mocking my fear. The further I walked, the more deliberate the asylum's shape became, no longer just a ruin of brick and steel, but a labyrinth with intent, a body guiding me toward its heart. At the end of the corridor another set of double doors waited, their surface scarred with scratches that had gouged deep into the wood, marks that could not have come from tools but from hands desperate, clawing, begging to be freed. I hesitated only a second before pushing them open, and the room inside bloomed with lantern light to reveal rows of iron chairs. Each bolted to the ground, each equipped with thick leather straps darkened with stains that time had not erased. On the walls, faint recordings played from speakers long disconnected, voices repeating in hollow static, cries, shouts, whispers collapsing into fragments of words. I froze when one voice cut sharper than the rest, clear, piercing, unmistakable. "Lila, please." My knees buckled, the lantern nearly slipping from my grasp, because that was my sister's voice, aged but real, slicing through 2 decades of silence like a knife. I staggered closer to the speaker, pressing my ear against the cracked metal, and the static crackled into emptiness as if the asylum itself had teased me with her voice only to remind me that it controlled what I heard when I heard it and how much it would allow. My chest ached, my lungs burning with every breath, rage clawing inside me until it spilled out as a whisper that was more a vow than a plea. I will not let you keep her. When I turned, I saw movement at the far end of the room, a figure darting past the edge of my lantern's reach, too fast, too silent, yet deliberate. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of rust and rot, and the shadows lengthened, pulling toward the direction the figure had gone. Against reason, against instinct, I followed, because if the asylum was baiting me, it meant I was on the right path, it meant Clara's truth was near. The hallway twisted downward, a spiral of cracked stone steps leading into the bowels of the asylum, the air colder, wetter, filled with the stench of standing water. The lantern flame sputtered, dimming as though smothered by invisible hands, and I clutched it close, whispering to myself the way I once whispered to Clara when we were children hiding from storms. Just one more step and we'll be safe. The words did not comfort me here. The words sounded like they belonged to someone else, spoken in a voice I barely recognized, as though the asylum itself had already begun reshaping me. At the bottom of the steps, the corridor widened into an underground ward. Cells lined the walls, iron bars bent outward as though something had forced its way free, though the scratches along the inside suggested otherwise, that the desperation had been turned inward. That those locked inside had clawed and beaten until there was nothing left of them but fragments scattered across the stone. In one cell, I saw initials scratched into the wall, "See him." My chest constricted so tightly I could barely breathe, my hand reaching instinctively toward the bars though I knew they held nothing now but air and echoes. My sister had been here. My sister had lived inside this nightmare. Something moved in the darkness beyond the cells, a faint shuffle, a breath that was not mine. I raised the lantern, the glow catching the glint of eyes, not human, not animal, but reflections like shards of broken mirrors floating in the dark. They blinked once, then vanished, swallowed by silence so complete it pressed against my eardrums until I thought they might burst. My legs trembled, but I forced myself forward, each step an act of defiance against the asylum's will, each step a declaration that I was not afraid, even as fear gnawed every corner of my mind. At the end of the underground ward was a door unlike the others, its surface smooth, untouched by time or decay, painted with a single symbol in crimson that had not faded. A circle, within it an eye, and beneath it a line of text so precise it looked etched rather than painted: "She is not lost. She is here." My hand hovered above the door, my breath quick, uneven, every instinct screaming at me not to touch it, not to invite what lay beyond into my world. And yet, my sister's face rose in my memory, smiling, alive, a face I would never see again unless I crossed every line, unless I risked every piece of myself to drag her truth into the light. My fingers brushed the door, the paint warm against my skin as though it had only just been drawn, and the lantern sputtered violently, flames stretching tall, shadows fleeing and then crashing back with twice their weight. A sound rose, faint at first, then swelling into a chorus, whispers, layered upon whispers, voices of countless patients, doctors, and something deeper, all merging into a symphony that clawed at my skull. In the center of the storm of voices, one rose clear, sharp, undeniable. My sister again, whispering not in fear but in warning. "You should not have come here." I stumbled back, my breath tearing from my lungs, the lantern nearly extinguishing, and the corridor seemed to warp, lengthening, the cells around me rattling as if unseen hands clawed at the bars from within. The asylum shuddered, alive, awake, enraged that I had touched what it guarded. The last thing I heard before I fled back up the spiral steps, lantern sputtering, was not my sister's voice but something else, something deeper, something that seemed to crawl from the foundations of the asylum itself, whispering my name with hunger. "Lila." The spiral staircase groaned beneath my boots as I climbed back into the main corridors, the lantern flickering wildly as though it too wanted to escape what lay below, and yet the asylum was not finished with me. The air above was no lighter, no freer, because every hallway now hummed with a low vibration, a thrum that rattled the pipes and whispered through the cracked tiles, a heartbeat that was not mine. I gripped the lantern tighter, my knuckles pale, and pressed forward into the next ward. The door's plaque was rusted but readable: Ward B, Isolation. My stomach clenched, because even before I stepped through the threshold I knew what kind of silence waited inside, a silence deeper than death, the silence of minds broken not by madness but by solitude. The moment I entered, the walls closed in, narrow cells on either side with tiny slits for windows, each cell barely large enough to hold a man but scarred with scratches that told the stories of those who had tried to carve their way out with fingernails, teeth, or hope. I lifted the lantern to one wall and froze. Words were scratched over and over into the stone, letters bleeding into one another until the message became almost illegible. But my eyes locked onto one sentence repeated 100 times, "She sings to us in the dark." My throat tightened, because Clara had been a singer, her voice soft but unshakable, the sound that once filled our house with warmth. To see it here, etched into madness, was to feel her presence bleeding into the bones of the asylum itself. A sound rose from the far end of the corridor, a faint hum, barely audible, but steady, carrying notes that wove into something dangerously close to a melody. My blood ran cold. I knew that sound. My legs carried me forward before I could think, chasing the hum that wrapped around my heart like barbed wire. I reached the final cell, its door slightly ajar, and pushed it open. The lantern's glow revealed nothing but emptiness, no figure, no source of the sound, only a chair bolted to the floor with restraints hanging limp, and carved into the seat was a single word. "Stay." The hum stopped. The silence that followed was worse than any scream, pressing against my skull until my ears rang. I stumbled back, breath ragged, clutching the lantern as I retreated from the cell, forcing myself deeper into the ward though my body screamed to flee. The asylum was toying with me, showing me fragments, giving me enough to bleed but not enough to heal. Beyond isolation lay the therapy wing, its entrance marked with the remnants of white paint, a door half hanging from its hinges. The air inside was thicker, warmer, almost humid, and the lantern illuminated rows of reclining chairs with rusted headgear dangling above them, wires coiled like serpents spilling onto the floor. Mercer subject. My sister. My Clara. My blood boiled, a scream clawing at my throat, but before it could escape, the machines groaned. One by one, dials shifted, lights sputtered, wires twitched like veins filling with blood again. The chairs rattled, leather restraints snapping taut as if invisible bodies writhed against them. My breath froze. The asylum wasn't just remembering. It was reenacting. I stumbled back, heart pounding, lantern shaking violently in my grasp as static filled the air, voices overlapping in a deafening chorus of screams, laughter, and commands shouted by doctors long dead. Again, increase the voltage. The words boomed through the chamber, though no living lips spoke them. My vision blurred, the room spinning, and for a second I swore I saw my sister strapped to one of the chairs. Her head jerking, her mouth opening in a scream that produced no sound, only light spilling from her lips before vanishing into shadow. I blinked and she was gone, the chairs empty, the machines silent once more, as if mocking my desperation, as if punishing me for daring to believe. My knees buckled, and I dropped against the wall, gasping, forcing myself to remember why I was here, why I could not break no matter how hard the asylum pressed. "Clara. I'll pull you out of this, I swear." My whisper shook, my vow a fragile thread in a storm of silence. I rose, pushing deeper until I reached the heart of the therapy wing, a chamber larger than the rest, its walls covered not in wallpaper or stone but in murals painted directly onto the plaster, sprawling shapes in red and black, some resembling faces twisted in agony, others symbols that pulsed when the lantern passed over them. My stomach twisted as I traced one mural, the lines curling into an unmistakable shape, and I, watching, wide, unblinking. Beneath it, smeared in crimson that had not faded even with time, were words that sent my breath stuttering. "The eye sees the last, Mercer." I dropped the lantern, catching it just before it shattered, but the damage was done. The flame flared high, shadows stretching grotesque against the walls, faces in the murals twisting, writhing as though alive. A sound rose, low and guttural, not from outside but from the walls themselves, a moan that trembled through the floor and rattled the glass jars scattered across the shelves. I backed toward the door, but it slammed shut before I touched it, the sound like a gunshot, sealing me inside with the murals, with the watching eye. My pulse roared in my ears, sweat dripping cold down my back, as the murals began to move. Faces peeled themselves from the walls, shadows detaching and slithering across the floor, curling toward me like smoke given weight. My lantern flickered, sputtered, then steadied, its glow clashing with the creeping dark. I lifted it high, my voice breaking into the silence. Clara, if you're here, guide me, please. For one impossible moment, the shadows paused, halting mid-reach, and the murals I blinked, slow, deliberate, its pupil narrowing onto me. A whisper slipped through the air, softer than breath but undeniable. She waits. The lantern's flame flared so violently I shielded my eyes, and when it dimmed again, the shadows had receded, the murals still once more, the door creaking open as if the asylum had grown bored of me. My chest heaved, every muscle trembling, but I forced my legs to move, stumbling into the corridor beyond, half convinced I'd left pieces of myself behind with the murals. The asylum was no longer showing me fragments. It was leading me, step by step, deeper into its heart, closer to Clara. The air grew colder, heavier, as though I were descending though the corridor remained flat, and I realized the building was shifting around me, reshaping itself to trap me in its design. Doors that once stood open now locked tight, windows I passed moments earlier vanished into blank walls. The asylum was alive, and I was its prey. The corridor narrowed until it felt more like a vein than a hallway, the walls sweating dampness, pipes hissing as if exhaling. My lantern sputtered again, each flicker revealing glimpses of movement that vanished before I could turn my head, a shadow ducking into a doorway, a figure slipping behind a corner, eyes glowing faintly in the distance before blinking out like embers dying in ash. I knew I was being guided. I knew I was being watched. Finally, the passage opened into another ward, its sign half ripped from the frame, Ward C, Infirmary. The smell hit first, rot mixed with chemicals sharp enough to burn the back of my throat. Beds lined the walls, their mattresses blackened with mold, restraints dangling like skeletal arms. The sheets were still dented, as if patients had only just left, as though they would return any moment and lie back down. I raised the lantern and froze. On the nearest bed sat a doll. Its porcelain face was cracked, one eye missing, the other painted iris staring at me. A child's doll, in a place that had never housed children. My heart hammered as I approached, every instinct screaming to leave it alone, but my hand reached out despite myself. The porcelain was cold, almost wet, and as my fingers brushed it, the missing eye socket bled black liquid down its cheek. The lantern sputtered violently, plunging the infirmary into waves of dark and light. Each flicker revealed a new scene, the beds filled with bodies twitching under stained sheets, nurses with eyeless faces gliding silently between them, shadows curling along the ceiling like smoke seeking lungs to suffocate. I stumbled back, lantern clutched to my chest, whispering my sister's name like a prayer, forcing myself not to break. Then, in the midst of the chaos, one figure stood still. A woman in a patient's gown, her hair long, tangled, her hands clasped tight around something pressed to her chest. She did not move as the lantern flickered, did not vanish as the others did, and my breath caught because I recognized her posture, her shoulders, the curve of her face turned in shadow. Clara. But when I stepped forward, the figure dissolved like mist, leaving behind only the faint sound of humming. The same lullaby she used to sing when we were children, the one that always lulled me to sleep when storms shook the house. My throat burned with grief, but I followed the sound, weaving through the infirmary until I reached a door at the far end, its frame splintered, handle rusted. I pushed it open and entered a smaller chamber, lit not by lantern but by something unnatural, a pale blue glow seeping from glass jars lining the shelves. Inside each jar floated fragments, teeth, nails, scraps of fabric, a lock of hair, each pulsing faintly as though alive. I staggered, bile rising in my throat, until my eyes landed on one jar that froze me to the floor. Inside, floating gently as though suspended in water, was a ribbon I knew well. Red silk, frayed at the edges, the very one Clara used to wear in her hair when she sang on the porch during summer evenings. My legs buckled, lantern clattering against the floor, the glow of the jar swallowing me whole. My hands shook as I lifted the jar, the ribbon twisting inside as though responding to my touch. Then came the voice. Not whispered, not echoed, but clear, close, unmistakable. You came. I spun, heart slamming against my ribs, but no one stood there. The chamber was empty, silent except for my own ragged breath. Yet the voice lingered, a presence pressing against my skull. Clara's voice, but warped, layered, as if spoken through glass. You came, it repeated, softer, almost mournful. But you are late. The jars rattled, glass shivering in their frames, the glow pulsing brighter, faster, until the chamber throbbed with light and sound. Shadows erupted across the walls, twisting into shapes of doctors with gleaming instruments, patients strapped and screaming, nurses gliding soundlessly. They circled me, hundreds of them, their movements jerky, unnatural, as if the asylum replayed every horror it had absorbed. I clutched the jar to my chest, shouting into the chaos. "Clara! Where are you? Show yourself." The shadows froze. Every head turned toward me, faces blank but their attention heavy as chains. Slowly, their forms collapsed into the floor, bleeding into black liquid that spread across the tiles, creeping toward me. My lantern sputtered once, twice, then went out, plunging the chamber into darkness lit only by the jars. In that glow, I saw her. Clara, or what was left of her. She stood in the center of the room, pale, thin, her eyes too wide, too bright, like the jars themselves. Her mouth opened, and the lullaby spilled out, the same soft tune from our childhood, but warped, fractured, laced with static and echoes that made the air shiver. My hands trembled, the jar slipping from my grip and shattering, the ribbon spilling out, limp and wet. "Clara," my voice cracked. "It's me. It's your brother. I'm here to take you home." Her head tilted, the song pausing. For a heartbeat, her expression softened, eyes flickering with recognition. Then the asylum roared. The walls trembled, jars shattered one by one, their contents spilling into liquid shadows that rose like a flood, surging toward us. Clara's face twisted, her mouth opening in a scream not her own, 1,000 voices tearing free at once. The flood struck me, cold, suffocating, pulling me down into darkness. I fought, thrashing, the ribbon tangling around my wrist like a lifeline, but the weight of the asylum crushed me, filling my lungs with silence, pressing me deeper into its memory. For a moment, I swore I saw her reaching for me, her hand pale, shaking, just inches away. And then, nothing. When I opened my eyes, I lay on the floor of a corridor I did not recognize, the ribbon still tied around my wrist, the lantern beside me somehow lit once more. The asylum was quiet again, its walls still, its air heavy but no longer trembling. Clara was gone. Or hidden. Or both. I forced myself to my feet, clutching the ribbon, heart pounding with new certainty. I was not chasing fragments anymore. I was inside the asylum's design, and Clara was at its core. Whatever had been done to her, whatever the asylum had turned her into, she was still here. And I would not leave without her. But the deeper I walked, the clearer it became, the asylum did not intend to let me leave at all. The ribbon on my wrist pulsed faintly as though alive, guiding me through the twisting corridors deeper into the asylum's gut. Each step echoed louder than it should, a heartbeat in stone, as if the building itself was breathing. The air grew colder, the lantern's flame bending as if pushed by unseen currents. I whispered Clara's name again and again, like a mantra, like an anchor, though even my own voice sounded strange, drawn thin, swallowed by the walls before it could return as an echo. I descended a stairwell so steep it felt endless. The walls were slick, carved crudely from stone, lined with hooks that clinked faintly as I passed. Chains dangled, some snapped, others still holding scraps of fabric stiff with age. At the bottom, a rusted gate waited, its bars bent as if forced open from the inside. I squeezed through, the ribbon tugging faintly, pulling me into the dark beyond. The tunnels opened into chambers that were not meant for patients, these were operating theaters, hidden far from the world's eyes. Tables with straps, rusted saws and drills glinting faintly in lantern light, stains that had long ago seeped into the stone. I ran my hand over a ledger left on one of the tables, its pages warped but still legible. Each entry bore a name, a date, a single cruel note, unfit, resistant, receptive. And there, scrawled across the final pages, was her name. Lila Mercer. The entry did not say, unfit. It did not say, resistant. It said only one word, vessel. My knees buckled. Vessel, for what? For whom? The walls seemed to lean closer, listening, pressing. The lantern shook in my grip as I forced myself onward, heart slamming. The next chamber opened wide, lit not by lantern flame but by faint veins of blue light running through the walls, pulsing like veins. In its center rose a stone dais, and on it, a chair. Not a chair, I realized, but a throne, built of metal and bone, wires trailing from its arms into the ground like roots. Strapped to it was a skeleton in tattered fabric, its skull still bound by a cracked leather mask. The wires pulsed with faint light, as if still feeding, still alive. As I approached, the ribbon tightened around my wrist, biting into skin. My chest constricted, breath ragged, because I recognized the scraps of fabric still clinging to the skeleton. It was Clara's dress. The same dress she wore the night she vanished. No. The word tore out of me, raw, breaking. No, no, no. The shadows stirred. They poured from the walls, stretching tall and jagged, twisting into forms of doctors in long coats, masks glinting, eyes burning pale. Their hands held instruments that shimmered, not of metal but of shadow sharpened to blades. They circled the throne, whispering in unison. Vessel. 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 I stumbled back, clutching the lantern like a shield, but the ribbon burned against my wrist, dragging my arm forward, forcing me closer to the throne. The skeleton's head lifted, not fully, but enough. Its jaw creaked open, and from within the hollow of bone spilled Clara's voice. You're late. Tears blurred my sight. Clara. I'm here, I swear, I'll get you out of this. The skeleton twitched, bones snapping, wires shivering as the dais pulsed. The shadows closed in, their whispers rising to screams, their instruments raised. The lantern flared violently, light scattering them for a moment, and in that breath of silence I heard her again, clearer, closer, not from the bones but from the walls themselves. Follow, the floor shuddered, a crack splitting open beside the dais, revealing a staircase spiraling down into abyss. The ribbon pulled hard, urging me to descend. My whole body shook, torn between the horror before me and the pull below, but I obeyed. I left the dais, the throne, the skeleton that bore her dress, and plunged deeper, lantern blazing. The stairs seemed endless, air thick with dust and rot. Whispers crawled along the walls, some Clara's voice, others the voices of hundreds more, overlapping, begging, warning, cursing. The ribbon dragged me until the stairs ended at a vast iron door, sealed with chains. Carved into its surface was a symbol, a circle of teeth surrounding a single staring eye. The lantern sputtered violently, flame bending toward the door as if sucked in. I lifted my shaking hand to the chains. The moment my fingers touched them, the ribbon unraveled from my wrist, sliding into the links, burning with pale light. One by one, the chains snapped, falling away like dead snakes. The door groaned and swung open. The chamber beyond was cathedral-like, vast and echoing, its ceiling lost in shadows. Along the walls stood dozens of figures, patients frozen in place, their eyes glowing faintly blue, their bodies rigid, unmoving. At the chamber's heart was a pool of black water, its surface smooth as glass. And above it, suspended by wires that vanished into darkness, was Clara. Her body hung limp, arms spread, head tilted forward. Tubes pierced her skin, feeding light into her veins, making her glow faintly. My throat locked, every muscle screaming to run to her, to pull her free, but the water stirred before I could move. From the pool rose shapes, dozens, hundreds, the faces of the lost, their mouths open in silent screams, their hands reaching. They rose higher and higher until they formed a towering figure of water and shadow, its face shifting between dozens of patients, nurses, doctors. Its voice thundered in all of them at once. She is ours. The asylum lives through her. The sound split my skull, my lantern cracking in my grip. I fell to my knees, clutching my head, tears streaming, rage boiling through fear. I forced myself to scream back. No. She's mine. She's my sister. The figure roared, the water surging, the suspended form of Clara twitching violently, her eyes snapping open. They glowed bright, blinding, and when she spoke, her voice was layered, hers, mine, and the asylum's. You shouldn't have come. The pool rippled, shadows rising higher, the walls shivering as if the whole asylum had woken. My heart pounded, the ribbon now wrapped tight around my palm again though I hadn't touched it, its glow defiant. I staggered to my feet, bracing myself for whatever horror was coming next, because I knew this was no longer about survival. This was war. The figure of water and shadow towered over me, its thousand faces flickering in agony, its thousand voices echoing through the cathedral chamber. Clara's body convulsed where she hung, light searing her veins, eyes burning with the asylum's power. I staggered forward, lantern shaking, ribbon glowing, heart tearing itself apart with every step. The floor vibrated with each word the entity spoke, its voice both a scream and a whisper pressed directly into my skull. She belongs to us, she is the asylum's soul, through her we endure. I forced myself closer to the pool, the black surface rippling with every tremor. My boots sank slightly into the damp stone as if the ground itself wanted to swallow me. My throat burned as I screamed, Clara. Fight them. You're not theirs, you're mine. You're my sister. For a flicker of a moment, her head lifted, her mouth trembling. Lila. The voice was faint, buried beneath layers of others, but it was hers. My heart leapt, she was still inside. The ribbon tightened around my wrist again, cutting off circulation, glowing so brightly it seared my skin. It was pulling me toward the pool, toward the writhing shadow mass. Every instinct screamed to resist, but my body obeyed. My foot touched the black water, and instantly 1,000 cold hands clawed at me, pulling, tearing, whispering in my ears. Faces pressed up against the surface, mouths opening in silence, begging me to join them. I plunged deeper, choking on darkness, but the ribbon dragged me through, cutting a path. Shapes rushed past me, memories, fragments, visions. Clara screaming as she was strapped down. Doctors murmuring about integration. Patients vanishing into walls. Nurses humming lullabies with mouths sewn shut. The asylum feeding, always feeding. And then, light. I surfaced into a space that wasn't stone, wasn't water, but something in between, a nightmare of shifting corridors, endless doors, staircases spiraling into nothing. In the center stood Clara, no longer suspended but standing on her own, her eyes glowing, her face pale but whole. Clara. I stumbled toward her, reaching out, tears blinding me. But she stepped back, her expression torn. Lila, you shouldn't have come. I'm not me anymore. Yes, you are. My voice cracked, breaking into sobs. I don't care what they've done, you're still my sister, and I'm not leaving you here. The walls groaned, shadows splitting open, doctors pouring out, their faces smooth, their instruments dripping blackness. They swarmed toward us, but Clara raised her hand and they froze mid-step. Her voice deepened, layered again. See? They obey me. I am part of this place now. I shook my head violently, clutching the ribbon, holding it out like a weapon. No. That's them talking, not you. They've twisted you, but you're stronger than this. You sang me to sleep every night, you held my hand when I was afraid. That's you. That's still you. Her lips quivered, the glow in her eyes flickering. For a heartbeat, I thought I had her, until the shadows surged again, slamming into me, knocking me to the ground. Cold pierced my chest, pressing the air from my lungs, claws digging into my skin. I screamed, thrashing, but the weight crushed me. The ribbon burned, wrapping tighter, and suddenly it wasn't just on my wrist. It lashed outward, glowing like molten light, striking the shadows, burning them into smoke. My hand shook violently as the ribbon formed a chain between me and Clara, connecting us. She gasped, clutching her chest, her body shaking as if the connection hurt. Stop! You'll destroy me too. I crawled to my knees, tears streaming, voice ragged. Then we go together. But I won't leave you to them. The shadows screamed, the walls bending inward, the asylum convulsing as if in pain. The entity's voice thundered from every direction. Vessel must remain, the asylum must feed, you will not take her. I staggered forward, pulling on the ribbon, dragging myself closer to Clara as the shadows clawed me back. Blood ran down my arms, my throat raw from screaming. Clara! Fight it! Please! She fell to her knees, clutching her head, her screams echoing mine. The glow in her eyes cracked like glass, fragments breaking away. The ribbon pulled tighter, brighter, the chain of light fusing us together. And then, silence. The shadows froze. The walls stopped trembling. Clara lifted her head, tears streaking her face, her eyes now dim but human. She whispered, Lila. Hope surged. I pulled her into my arms, clutching her so tight it hurt, sobbing into her hair. I've got you. I've got you. But the silence shattered. The asylum roared, louder than ever, its rage like an earthquake. The walls collapsed inward, corridors folding, the pool boiling into waves of black water. The entity screamed, not in words now, but in pure fury. The whole building was coming down. Clara clutched me back, her voice shaking. We can't both leave. It's bound to me. If I go, it follows. No. I shouted, refusing. We'll find another way. She cupped my face, her hands trembling, her eyes soft. You're the strong one now. You have to live. You have to tell them what happened here. End it. Before I could answer, she pressed the ribbon into my palm. It burned, searing into my skin, becoming part of me. Then she shoved me back. The ground split, and I fell through darkness, her face the last thing I saw before the shadows consumed her. I woke outside the asylum, lying in the overgrown courtyard under a bleeding dawn. The building loomed above, but it was collapsing inward, windows shattering, walls crumbling, the ground trembling as if the earth itself rejected it. Within minutes, Black Hollow Asylum was gone, swallowed into a sinkhole of dust and silence. The ribbon was still burned into my palm, a scar glowing faintly. Clara's voice lingered in my ears, whispering that same lullaby. She was gone. Or she was everywhere. Or perhaps, she was inside me now. And I knew one thing with cold, merciless certainty. The asylum was not dead. It had only moved. Into me.